The whistle's shrill cry echoed across the dusty platform of Redemption Creek Station, its sound as harsh and unforgiving as the desert wind that whipped through Sarah Mitchell's torn wedding veil. The white silk, once pristine and hopeful, now fluttered like a wounded bird against the scarred left side of her face, the side that had cost her everything. She stood motionless amid the chaos of departing passengers, her gloved hands clutching a worn leather satchel that contained her entire life. The burns that traced from her left temple down to her jaw caught the harsh afternoon sun, the puckered skin a testament to the barn fire that had claimed not only her beauty, but apparently her worth as a woman. "Thomas?" she whispered, though she knew he was gone. The sound of his polished boots retreating across the wooden platform still rang in her ears, along with his stammered excuses and barely concealed horror when he'd first seen her face beneath the veil he'd insisted she wear. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I can't. People will talk, my business partners, they—" His voice had trailed off, but his meaning was clear. She wasn't the woman he'd agreed to marry sight unseen through carefully worded letters. The fire had changed everything. Now the train was pulling away, taking Thomas Whitmore back to his comfortable life in San Francisco, leaving her stranded 200 miles from nowhere with $3, a broken heart, and nowhere to go. The other passengers averted their eyes as they hurried past, their whispered comments carrying on the wind like thorns. Poor thing. What happened to her face? Shouldn't be out in public like that. Sarah pulled her shawl higher, covering as much of the scarring as possible. The desert heat was oppressive, but not as crushing as the weight of her humiliation. She'd sold everything, her father's farm, her mother's jewelry, even her hope chest, to make this journey west. Now she had nothing, and no one. The platform was nearly empty when she heard the heavy thud of boots approaching. Not the quick, nervous steps of someone trying to avoid her, but the deliberate pace of a man with purpose. She didn't look up, expecting another cruel comment or unwanted pity. "Ma'am." The voice was deep, weathered like old leather, with a gentleness that surprised her. "You all right?" Sarah raised her head slowly, preparing for the familiar look of shock and revulsion. Instead, she found herself gazing into the kindest brown eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face that bore its own geography of pain. A jagged scar ran from the stranger's right ear across his cheek to the corner of his mouth, pulling it into a permanent slight grimace. His left hand rested on a walking stick, and she could see that 2 fingers were missing. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn but clean work clothes, his dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. Despite his scars, or perhaps because of them, there was something unmistakably handsome about him, a strength that went beyond physical appearance. Sarah started, then stopped. What could she say? That she was fine when her world had just crumbled? That she was brave when she felt utterly broken? "Name's Daniel Reeves," he said, removing his hat with his good hand. "I couldn't help but notice you've been standing here a while. This heat's enough to fell a strong man, and you look like you could use some shade and maybe some water." Sarah's throat was indeed parched, though she'd been too stunned to notice. "I don't want to be any trouble, Mr. Reeves." "No trouble at all, Miss Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell." She hesitated, then added, "I was supposed to be Mrs. Whitmore, but—" She gestured helplessly at her face. Daniel's expression didn't change, didn't show the pity or disgust she'd grown accustomed to. "His loss," he said simply. "Come on, there's a decent place to sit over by the station house. Clara makes good lemonade." As they walked slowly, Daniel's limp more pronounced than he tried to let on, Sarah found herself stealing glances at this unexpected Samaritan. "You don't find my appearance disturbing?" Daniel stopped and turned to face her fully. "Miss Mitchell, I've been through my own fire, literal and otherwise. Scars don't make a person less beautiful. They just tell a story of survival. And from where I'm standing, you're one of the most beautiful women I've ever had the privilege to meet." The sincerity in his voice made tears spring to Sarah's eyes. The first tears she'd allowed herself since Thomas had walked away. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like something broken and discarded. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Daniel smiled, and despite the scar that twisted his mouth, It transformed his entire face. Maybe because I know what it's like to feel like the world's given up on you. Maybe because my mama raised me to help folks when they need it. Or maybe, he said, offering her his arm, because sometimes strangers are just angels in disguise. As they reached the shade of the station house overhang, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how she'd survive in this harsh land. But for the first time since the fire, someone had looked at her and seen not her scars, but her worth. Clara's lemonade was indeed good, tart and cold, cutting through the desert, heat that seemed to press against the station house windows like a living thing. Sarah sat in the blessed shade, her wedding dress now dusty and wrinkled, while Daniel Reeves sat across from her, his weathered hands wrapped around his own glass. "So what's your plan now?" Daniel asked gently, though they both knew she likely didn't have one. Sarah stared into her lemonade, watching the ice melt. "I suppose I'll have to wire my cousin in Chicago, see if she'll take me in. Though I don't have enough money for train fare, and I can't imagine she'll be thrilled to house a—" she touched her scarred cheek. "A damaged woman with no prospects." "You're not damaged," Daniel said firmly. "Different, maybe. Marked by life. Certainly, but not damaged." Through the window, Sarah could see the few remaining passengers boarding the afternoon train back east. Soon, she'd be alone with her shame and her uncertain future. "You're very kind, Mr. Reeves, but kindness doesn't change facts. No man will want me now. I have no skills beyond keeping house and tending a garden. I'm 24 years old with nothing to offer the world." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his brown eyes studying her face with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. "What if I told you that wasn't true?" "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Mitchell. It might sound crazy and you're free to say no, and I'll buy you that train ticket to Chicago myself. But hear me out first." Sarah's heart began to race. "I'm listening. I own a ranch about 10 miles north of here. It's not much. 1,000 acres of stubborn land that fights me every day, a small herd of cattle, and a house that needs a woman's touch. I've been working it alone for 3 years now, and I'm barely keeping my head above water." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I need a wife, Miss Mitchell, not for romance or passion, but for partnership. Someone to help run the house, tend the garden, maybe help with the books. Someone who understands that life isn't always pretty, but it can still be good." Sarah's mouth fell open. Are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am, though not in any traditional sense." Daniel's scarred face was earnest. "It would be a business arrangement, at least at first. Separate rooms, no expectations beyond mutual respect and shared work. You'd have a home, security, purpose. I'd have a partner who wouldn't judge me for my own shortcomings. But you don't know me. I could be terrible company or lazy or—" "You could be," Daniel agreed. "But I don't think you are. I see how you carry yourself despite what you've been through. I see someone who traveled hundreds of miles to start a new life, who's still sitting here with dignity intact even after being abandoned. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Sarah's mind reeled. Marriage to a stranger, life on a remote ranch, starting over in the most literal way possible. "Why would you do this? Why risk taking on someone else's problems?" Daniel's smile was rueful. "Because I have plenty of my own problems, and maybe together we can solve them better than apart. I lost these fingers in a cattle accident," he said, raising his damaged hand. "Got this scar and this limp when my barn collapsed on me during a storm. People in town look at me like I'm broken too. Maybe 2 broken people can make one whole life." The afternoon train whistle sounded in the distance. Soon it would be time to decide. East to an uncertain welcome with family who might not want her, or north to an impossible marriage with a scarred stranger who called her beautiful. "You said separate rooms," Sarah said slowly. "For as long as you want. Maybe forever, maybe not. That would be up to you, when and if you were ready. And if it doesn't work? If we can't stand each other after a month?" Daniel considered this. "Then I'll help you get wherever you want to go with enough money to start fresh. You have my word on that." Sarah looked out at the desert landscape, harsh and unforgiving, but somehow beautiful in its honesty. Like Daniel himself, it didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. "What's your ranch called?" "Haven't named it yet. Figured if I ever found the right partner, we'd choose a name together." "And you think I—" The train whistle sounded again, closer now. Decision time. Sarah thought of her cousin's small apartment in Chicago, the pitying looks, the whispered conversations about poor Sarah and her situation. Then she looked at Daniel Reeves, this unexpected man who saw her scars as survival rather than shame. "If I said yes," she said quietly, "when would we marry?" "There's a circuit preacher comes through Redemption Creek every Friday. Next one's in 3 days. We could have a simple ceremony, then head to the ranch. 3 days to get to know each other. 3 days to decide if we can stand each other," Daniel corrected with a gentle smile. Sarah took a deep breath, tasting dust and possibility in equal measure. "Mr. Reeves, I believe I'd like to see your ranch." Daniel's smile lit up his scarred face like sunrise over the desert. "Yes, ma'am. I believe I'd like to show it to you." As the eastbound train pulled away without her, Sarah Mitchell felt something she hadn't experienced since before the fire. The excitement of an uncertain but hopeful future. The ride to Daniel's ranch took them through some of the most austere landscape Sarah had ever seen. Endless stretches of sagebrush and red earth beneath a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon. Daniel's wagon was sturdy but simple, pulled by 2 patient mules who seemed to know the way by heart. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, surprising herself. The desert had a stark honesty that appealed to her somehow. "Most folks call it desolate," Daniel replied, guiding the mules around a particularly rough patch of road. "But I've always thought there was something peaceful about it. Forces you to appreciate the small things, a wildflower growing through a crack in the rocks, the way the light changes the color of the mountains throughout the day." They'd been married that morning in a brief ceremony at the Redemption Creek Chapel, with Clara from the station house and the elderly preacher as witnesses. Sarah wore her traveling dress. Her wedding gown felt too much like a symbol of her previous failure, and Daniel had presented her with a simple gold band that fit perfectly. "How did you know my size?" she'd asked. "Lucky guess," he'd said, though she suspected he'd asked Clara to look when Sarah had removed her gloves to wash her hands. Now, as the afternoon sun beat down on them, Sarah found herself studying her new husband, a word that still felt strange and uncertain on her. Tongue. He was patient with the animals, gentle with the reins, and he'd already shown her small courtesies throughout the day, helping her into the wagon, making sure she had shade, sharing his water without being asked. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "How did you come to own it?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Bought it from a widow whose husband died of fever. She wanted to go back east to her family, so she sold it cheap to the first man with cash. I'd saved every penny from working other people's ranches for 10 years. Figured it was time to try making something of my own." "And has it been what you hoped?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Harder than I imagined, and I thought it would be plenty hard. The land's good, but it fights you for every blade of grass. The cattle are ornery, the weather's unpredictable, and the nearest neighbor is 15 miles away." "Sounds lonely." "It has been," Daniel admitted, "but I kept telling myself that if I could just make it work, if I could build something worth having, then maybe—" He trailed off. "Maybe what?" "Maybe I could convince some woman to share it with me. Didn't expect it to happen quite like this, though." Sarah shifted on the wagon seat, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what they'd both just done. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Are you afraid?" "Of this arrangement, I mean. Of marrying someone you barely know?" Daniel was quiet for so long that Sarah began to regret the question. Then he said, "Terrified. But I've been alone for 3 years, and I was starting to wonder if I'd forgotten how to talk to another human being. Some nights I'd find myself having conversations with the cattle just to hear a voice, even if it was my own." Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. "What did the cattle think of your conversation?" They're excellent listeners but terrible at giving advice. Sarah laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in months. Well, I promise to be better at advice than cattle. That's all I can ask for. As they crested a small rise, Daniel pointed ahead. There she is. Sarah looked and saw a modest ranch house nestled in a valley between two red rock formations. It was simple but well built, with a wide porch that promised cool evenings and a stone chimney that spoke of warm winters. A barn stood nearby, along with a chicken coop and several corrals. A small creek wound through the property, marked by a line of cottonwood trees that provided the only real green in the landscape. It's perfect, Sarah said, and meant it. It's rough, Daniel corrected, but it has potential. As they drew closer, Sarah could see what he meant. The house needed paint, the porch had a few loose boards, and the garden was clearly struggling. But the bones were good, and she could already envision what it might become with care and attention. Previous owners left some furniture, Daniel said as he helped her down from the wagon. It's not much, but it's functional. I've been using the main bedroom, but I moved my things to the small room off the kitchen. Figured you'd want the larger space. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness as they approached the front door. This was really happening. This was going to be her home, Daniel, her husband. This harsh, beautiful land, her new life. The interior was sparse but clean. Daniel had clearly made an effort. The floors were swept, the windows were clean, and there were even a few wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. The pump works, Daniel said, demonstrating at the kitchen sink. Water's good, comes from the creek. There's a vegetable garden behind the house, though it needs work. The hen house has 6 laying hens, and they're pretty reliable. Sarah walked through the rooms, taking inventory. The main bedroom was indeed larger, with a window that looked out toward the mountains. The bed was simple but sturdy, covered with a quilt that had seen better days but was clearly made with care. It's wonderful, Daniel, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. That evening, as Sarah prepared their first meal together in the kitchen, simple fare of beans, cornbread, and coffee, she found herself watching Daniel through the window as he tended to the animals. Despite his injuries, he moved with practiced efficiency, speaking gently to each creature as he worked. When he came in for dinner, he washed thoroughly at the pump and combed his hair before sitting down. "This is delicious," he said after his first bite of cornbread. "I haven't had homemade bread in years. It's just cornbread. It's perfect cornbread." After dinner, they sat on the porch as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Rather, it felt like the beginning of understanding. "Sarah," Daniel said finally, "I want you to know that you can change your mind about any of this. If you wake up tomorrow and decide this was all a mistake, I'll take you back to town. No questions asked." Sarah considered this, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "And what if you change your mind? What if you decide I'm not what you need after all?" "Won't happen," Daniel said with quiet certainty. "Already you've made this place feel more like a home than it has since I bought it." Sarah felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not love, not yet, but something that might grow into it given time and care. "Then I suppose we'd better make the best of it." Daniel's scarred smile was barely visible in the growing darkness, but she could hear it in his voice. "Yes, ma'am. I suppose we had better." 6 months had passed since Sarah Mitchell became Sarah Reeves, and the desert ranch had transformed from a struggling homestead into something approaching prosperity. The vegetable garden now flourished under Sarah's patient care, providing not only food for their table but surplus to trade in Redemption Creek. The chickens had increased from 6 to 20, and Daniel's small herd of cattle had grown as well, thanks to Sarah's careful attention to the ranch's finances and her insistence they invest their profits back into the land. More importantly, the distance between Sarah and Daniel had gradually closed. What began as separate rooms and polite conversation had evolved into shared meals, shared work, and shared quiet moments on the porch as the sun set over their land. Sarah had discovered that Daniel was not only kind, but intelligent, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once he felt comfortable. He read voraciously. The small bookshelf in the main room was filled with everything from agricultural manuals to poetry, and he listened to her opinions on everything from cattle breeding to the territorial politics that occasionally reached even their remote corner of the world. Daniel, in turn, had watched Sarah bloom like one of her desert wildflowers. Away from the cruel stares and whispered comments of strangers, she had found her confidence again. She laughed easily now, sang while she worked, and had begun talking about plans for the future. Their future. They had become partners in every sense except the most intimate, though even that boundary had begun to feel less like protection and more like an unnecessary wall. The turning point came on a particularly difficult day in late autumn. Daniel had been trying to repair a section of fence damaged by a flash flood when a spooked horse had kicked him, reopening the old injury to his leg. Sarah found him that evening sitting on the porch steps, his face pale with pain. "Why didn't you call for me?" she asked, immediately taking charge, helping him inside and settling him in his chair by the fireplace. "Didn't want to bother you," Daniel muttered, though. His jaw was tight with pain. "Daniel Reeves, you are the most stubborn man I've ever met," Sarah said, rolling up her sleeves. "Now let me look at that leg." She had tended injuries before. Farm life had taught her basic medical skills, but she'd never seen Daniel truly vulnerable. As she carefully cleaned and bandaged the wound, she was acutely aware of his sharp intake of breath when she touched a particularly tender spot. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not your fault," he managed. "Just frustrated with myself. This damn leg." "This leg," Sarah said firmly, "has carried you through 3 years of building this ranch from nothing. It's allowed you to work from dawn to dusk, to provide for both of us, to create something beautiful in this harsh place. I won't hear you. Curse it." Daniel looked down at her as she worked, her scarred face focused and intent, her hands gentle but sure. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See the good in everything, even when it's broken." Sarah's hand stilled on the bandage. "The same way you do, I suppose. The same way you looked at me on that platform and saw something worth saving." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. A recognition that they had become more than business partners, more than friends, more than two damaged people finding mutual benefit. "Sarah," Daniel said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She finished tying off the bandage and sat back on her heels. "What is it?" "I don't think of you as my business partner anymore, haven't for months." Sarah's heart began to race. "What do you think of me as?" "As the woman I'm falling in love with. As my wife, in every way that matters." He reached out and gently touched her scarred cheek. "As the most beautiful woman I've ever known." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "Daniel, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know this wasn't what we agreed to. I know you might not feel the same way. But I can't pretend anymore that this is just a business arrangement. Not when you smile at me over morning coffee and make my whole day brighter. Not when you work beside me in the garden and I forget to notice the desert heat. Not when you fall asleep reading by the fire and I want nothing more than to carry you to bed and hold you through the night." Sarah leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for weeks now, maybe months. I just didn't dare hope that you could truly love someone like me." "Someone like you?" Daniel's voice was incredulous. "Sarah, you're strong and kind and brilliant. You've taken a dying ranch and made it thrive. You've taken a lonely, broken man and made him whole again. Your scars don't make you less beautiful. They make you real, human. Someone who's survived and chosen to keep living and loving despite everything." When Sarah opened her eyes, Daniel was looking at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to separate rooms and polite distance." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Daniel said. "Have you?" By way of answer, Sarah leaned forward and kissed him, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as he responded. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Well," Sarah said, slightly breathless, "I suppose this changes our arrangement." "It does indeed, Mrs. Reeves." Daniel said with that crooked smile she'd come to love. Think you can handle being married to a scarred old rancher? Think you can handle being married to a scarred young woman with opinions about everything from cattle breeding to crop rotation? I'm counting on it. Later that night, as Sarah moved her few belongings from the main bedroom to Daniel's smaller room, now their room, she paused at the window that looked out over their land. In the moonlight, she could see the vegetable garden, now dormant for winter but ready to burst into life come spring. She could see the barn where their growing herd sheltered, the chicken coop where their flock roosted safely, the creek that would provide water for another season of growth. But most importantly, she could see Daniel reflected in the window glass, as he sat on their bed, carefully removing his boots. This man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to stay. This man who had offered her partnership and discovered love. This man who had looked at her scars and called them beautiful. Any regrets? Daniel asked, catching her eye in the reflection. Sarah turned from the window and smiled at her husband. Really her husband now, in every sense of the word. Only one. Daniel's face fell slightly. What's that? I regret that it took us so long to get here. His smile lit up the room. Well then, Mrs. Reeves, we'd better make up for lost time. As Sarah settled into Daniel's arms, their bed, their life together, she thought about the woman who had stood alone on that train platform 6 months ago. That woman had thought her life was over, that her scars made her unworthy of love, that she would spend the rest of her days alone and unwanted. How wrong she had been. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories began not with perfect people, but with broken ones who chose to heal together. Sometimes scars weren't signs of damage, but proof of survival. And sometimes, in the harsh beauty of the desert, two people could find exactly what they'd been looking for in the very last place they'd thought to look. Outside their window, the desert wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying the promise of another sunrise, another day of shared work and shared love, another chance to build something beautiful from the raw materials of hope and determination. Sarah Reeves closed her eyes and listened to her husband's steady breathing, felt the warmth of his body next to hers, and knew that she was exactly where she belonged. The abandoned bride had found her home at last, in the arms of a scarred rancher who had looked past her wounds and seen her heart. In the morning, they would rise early and tend their land together. They would plan for spring planting, discuss adding to their herd, maybe even talk about the children they both hoped would someday run through their desert garden. They would work side by side as they had for months now, but with the added joy of knowing that their partnership had grown into something deeper, richer, and more lasting than either had dared to dream. But tonight, they simply held each other. In the quiet darkness of their ranch house, two scarred souls who had found in each other not just acceptance but celebration. Love, they had learned, was not about being perfect. It was about being perfectly, imperfectly human together.